You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode of Speaking Sidemount is kindly sponsored by XDEEP, world leader in recreational and technical dive equipment. In today's episode, we're going to take a deep dive into the very popular XDEEP Stealth 2.0 sidemount system. Born in the caves and perfected for sport divers, the Stealth 2.0 is streamlined, perfectly balanced, and tailored to meet your sidemount diving needs from cave exploration to advanced trimix dives. I've been personally diving Stealth 2.0 systems for over 5 years and have logged many hundreds of dives in caves, wrecks, and deep open water using the XDEEP Stealth 2.0 Classic, Wreck, and Tech systems. Joining me on today's show, I have Patrick Widmann. Patrick is a renowned cave explorer with a vast resume of record-setting exploration projects around the world. He's part owner of ProTech Dive Centers in Playa del Carmen and Tulum, Mexico, and is the licensee, training director, and resident instructor trainer evaluator for dive agency PSAI Mexico. Together with XDEEP, Patrick developed the Stealth 2.0 range of sidemount systems. Patrick, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Thanks for the invitation.
Patrick, I'm sure plenty of our listeners know of you from your exploration work with the Quiet Diver team in the Dominican Republic Speleological Society, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in diving?
I started fairly young in Austria in a search and rescue team. My dad was part of the search and rescue team, so I joined them at the age of like 12, 13. And it was free gear, so I started diving there on the weekends and Tuesdays. And then I got certified as an open water diver when I was 16, graduated from high school, and ever since I'm 18 and something, I'm a full-time dive professional, and I'm going to turn 36 soon, so it has been quite a while. Moved from Austria to Croatia, from Croatia to Egypt, stayed 5 years in Egypt, where I started rebreather diving and trimix diving mostly. On my days off, I did the normal paddy career, and then in early 05, somebody gave me the book from Bill Stone about the Huatla expedition. Mm-hmm. And obviously being Austrian, my background was alpinism. So I thought there's a sport where I can combine climbing and diving in one sport. That just sounds about perfect. So 2005, I came the first time to Mexico, stayed for 2 months, came back in 2006 for 7 weeks. And in 2007, March, I moved here permanently. Haven't regretted that decision ever. And as the years go on, I'm enjoying it more and more.
Sure, awesome. And tell us about how you got started in sidemount diving.
That was in 2005. Truth be told, when I became a cave instructor, it was made clear that if you want to be a cave instructor, you need to have the specialty of sidemount. I don't know if that was a sales pitch, to be perfectly honest, to set me at the course, but that's just what there was. So I had to do that. And I used to use, my first rig was a Transpac, heavily modified with a wing on the inside. So you had the wing on the inside and the harness on the outside. So when you inflated it, you couldn't breathe anymore. Putting the tanks on was a disaster. Once you went underwater, everything was loose. To shortcut it, I hated sidemount diving. And then I became a sidemount instructor for it because, you know, you have to put food on the table. Mm-hmm. Thanks God we got the request like once every blue moon. And the main thing about the sidemount course was we hadn't really like exercises and skills and drills that much. It was like take the tank off, put it back on, but it was produce a sidemount rig for your client. Mm-hmm. So usually in the email conversation, it would be like, yo, what diving equipment do you have? But I have like a Scuba Bros stabilizing jacket and my back mount regulators. And the first guy that I had was a shoemaker on Constituentes, so he could stitch through really heavy webbing that saved all the soldering irons that we burned through before. So basically each sidemount course, I produced a unique sidemount harness for that person. And the biggest questions back then was, why do the tanks look like this on me and completely different on you?
Yeah.
And a lot in my later designs, first in the Aqua stealth and then in the XDEEP stealth, it really comes a lot from that, from a teaching aspect of, I want to be able to put somebody as fast as possible in the water, having to spend as little time as possible adjusting gear in the classroom because I hated it so much. And I wanted to have that trim weight possibility. So to get people also right away in a flat trim. So those two things. Plus, I think one of the main differences was, or is, I'm pretty skinny. And I'm from the Austrian Alps. So from the beginning, I was a dry suit diver here, which was really uncommon some 10, 12 years ago. The GE boys were diving dry, me and maybe one other guy, and everybody else was in a wetsuit. So I needed dry suit for teaching and guiding and wetsuit for exploration work, because when you hike an hour through the jungle, you don't want to carry the weight, and you're going to be hot enough to cool down in the water. So that's about my starting in Sidemount was back then. And just to before, I know maybe I'm talking too much, but we had this interesting conversation about how many people listen to your podcast. And I said,
yes,
that's really interesting. And you were then more talking about the podcast. I was more thinking about side mounting.
Yes.
Because I remember when I made the first Sidemount equipment with Aquas back then, they asked me, so how many units should we send you?
Yeah.
And I'm like, send me 10, because then I'm going to be good for 2 years. So that was like the request that we had.
Yeah.
In Sidemount diving, you know what I mean?
There's been an absolute explosion, hasn't there? I mean,
ridiculous. I mean, in a very positive way.
And in a way, you're to blame. I mean, it's kind of, I remember when I was getting into Sidemount myself, I mean, I was heavily influenced by Steve Bogart's video that he did, keep calling it the Yanni Music one, but it was just, I thought that was amazing. And then I found some videos of the Quiet Diver team and the RSS and watched you guys moving through the water and said, holy crap, I've got to get me some of that. It wasn't cave diving that got me, it was the skill set, you know, and I'd been diving for, I mean, I'm quite a bit older. I'd been diving for 25 years at that point. Us Kiwis are hunters, right? So we're hunting crayfish and scallops and spearfishing and so on. And so it was a real eye-opener to me. And it was kind of, that's what got me into Sidemount, was that skill set. And then, you know, one thing led to another into cave diving. So as I mentioned caves, I mean, you're renowned as a cave explorer. And I mean, I looked through your resume. Wow, it's just vast. So tell us a little about, just very briefly, you know, some of your favorite exploration projects that you've been involved in.
I guess we should do a podcast on that alone.
Well, we're going to, right? We've got an episode coming up in Madagascar, so don't just pull a few out.
In 2005, right, when I did my cave course, there's a part in the cave course called the psychological aspects of cave diving. And one of the questions is, what is your motivation to be a cave diver? And I was in a course with two other people. First guy said, you know, Mexican local, I want to be a cavern guide. I want to put food on the table. Fair enough. Next guy was from Switzerland, and he was like, like you, I'm really into, I want to look like Steve Bogarts. Which is so funny, by the way, when I think about it, because everybody watched that video on YouTube and thought, if I'm going to buy a race, I'm going to look like that. It's like you watch Roger Federer play tennis and think if you buy a Will bracket, you're going to be like that, you know?
That's right.
And then the question came to me, and I said, I want to be a cave explorer. Because first of all, you know, I'm from the Austrian Alps. So since I'm from a village of 700 people in the middle of the mountain. 700 people, 3,000 cows. So behind my house, the mountain started. So I was an explorer since I'm a kid. So the thought of going to where no man has gone before has always been like on my mind. And I remember in 2005, I came here, and INTD back then had like a cave night, and there was Sam Meacham, and Sam Meacham talked about exploration. And afterwards I asked Sam, how do you get paid to do that, bro? And he goes like, you don't. Like, now one of the biggest pleasures I have is running into Sam, and Sam is with students there, and he goes like, it's Patrick's coming back from Madagascar, you know, like so he's like keen on the stuff that I'm doing. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Some of my favorites right now, well, there is two deep caves. One I can't talk about because it's secret.
Okay.
It's not that we keep it a secret because, it's at the end of the world and it's an hour and a half. I mean, just the logistics, to get the logistics there. It's not that that we are afraid that somebody's going to jump the line, but we want to surprise the world with, hey, look, that's what there is.
Awesome.
And the other one is called Sonador in the Dominican Republic.
Mm-hmm.
And it just has the potential to be maybe the deepest spring of the Americas. Spring meaning there's water rushing out of it.
Yes.
I think currently it's Phantom Spring in Texas that is like some 500 feet deep, 140 whatever meters. And there we turn at like 110 and there's still like 45-degree angle, lots of water coming out, and the cave is just ridiculous looking. So I'm super keen about that. Then there's El Toro, also in the Dominican Republic. It's a multi-sump project. We spent 10 hours the last time we were there. It's 2.2 kilometers, then dry cave, 15 meters up, 30 meters across, 15 meters back down, another kilometer, and then you come to the next dry cave. So I'm really keen on that. And Madagascar and Chanamba keeps on going. Then there's Balata. There's really a vast number of different places that where the end of lines are haunting my dreams. Yeah, but I have to work every once in a while. The problem is you can't just be traveling.
Yeah, I was talking to Richard Harris, or Harry the Cave Diver, recently about their expeditions in New Zealand here with Pierce Resurgence, and they've got a similar thing.
Pierce Resurgence, man, those guys are really nuts. I don't know if I can say it on the air.
I'm going to try and interview him sometime. I spoke to him about them turning their dive when their lights were imploding. I think it was 220 meters. So yeah, that is something else.
Yeah,
we'll save that for another episode.
What I do in comparison is like walking through the park.
The subject of this episode is really to do a deep dive on the XDEEP South Sidemount system. So you've had a long relationship with XDEEP. How did this come about?
It was a very painful start. Let's not name names for the moment, but I was making a Sidemount equipment for another manufacturer, and there was a lot of communication problems. I guess like 30% of the gray hair that I'm sporting these days is actually coming from that. It cost me money, reputation, time. It was really a bad moment in my life. And then I taught cave diving in France, and I received a message from Piotr, the owner of XDEEP. Mm-hmm. And he goes like, hey, we're really keen on developing a Sidemount equipment with you. And I'm like, yeah. On top of it, he's from the same country. So I'm like, there's no way I'm going to do that.
I've been here before. I've heard this song before, right?
Exactly. So I'm like, if you want to do that, you're going to meet me here with the contracts ready to go that signs me the rights over, like that. Mm-hmm. Then I'm going to talk to you. Mm-hmm. And he goes like, where are you? And I'm like, I'm in Aix-en-Provence, the south of France. And he goes like, dude, I'm literally just here driving around with my family. Or like close by a couple of hours.
Right.
So we met for the first time, and like from the first second, the flow that we had was, first of all, it was an entire different expression of trust.
Yes.
When we talked, I just felt that, he's not going to rip me off with my ideas, because like the other guys like patented part of my ideas without telling me, and then, threatened me that they're going to sue me, and like it was really bad, no? And it was completely different from that perspective. Mm-hmm. And then also, I mean, Piotr is a genius, like nothing short of a genius, because he's a real geek for like materials and manufacturing.
Yes.
So that's where we work together as a team, because I can give him the input of my dive career, which meanwhile is also like from a professional point of view, like 17 years, and in so many different areas. Like so many times when it comes to side mounting, people are going to go like, oh, Patrick, but here's cold water, we use dry gloves, you don't know how to do that because you live in Mexico. And I'm like, I'm actually from Austria, and like the first 700 dives I did was with dry gloves, and I still dive in cold water. But so in any way, shape or form, I can take my experience and tell him, so this is how it feels, and this is what I would want to have. And then he can be like, that's possible, that's not possible. Or he can be like, that's possible. Each rig is going to be $3,000, and we're not going to sell a single one.
Yep.
Like I wanted to have, for example, from a mix of like dry caving, wet caving, because I do a lot of like multi-sump projects also, which we might or might not do in very soon future. We can't really talk about it, but he's always keen. Like I have crazy ideas about like movable habitats for deep diving projects in the middle of the third world. And he's always keen to come up with like ideas of how to do that. So I think we are a good team in regards to, I throw out the ideas and he makes it possible. Of course, because of the distance, Poland and Mexico, maybe we are not the fastest in producing equipment, because until the prototypes are sent and the feedback goes back and forth, and then he's really busy, I'm really busy. And then we just really spend a lot of time testing stuff before we release it.
Yes.
So we might not be the fastest, I guess, but usually once it's out, it's pretty solid. And what is so important for him, it has to be innovative.
Yes.
If it is like, even if you just look at the back mount wings now, like at the project and stuff, like you will not find a single wing anywhere that looks remotely like it. Take the Ghost, for example.
Yes.
As a travel single tank BCD and like so many other things. Like he's really like, if it is just remotely, just like what everybody else is, then we don't even bother making it.
One thing that has amazed me, having started with the Stealth Classic over 5 years ago now, is just there has been innovation there. I mean, now it's moved to the tech wing came out and the recreational wing alongside it, slightly smaller. They were real innovations, and the Classic itself was too. You're having a modular BCD. I've really enjoyed seeing the changes, and I guess those changes have come over 5 years, so it hasn't been really fast, but they've been really, really good innovations on top of a very good harness. So in the very beginnings, tell us about how the ideas and what you were thinking when you put this project together, because I can see that a lot of thought has gone into the design aspect, and then a lot's gone into the materials and manufacturing, which you were just talking about. So tell us what you were thinking early on.
That is actually quite simple. So as I told you, I came from a trans-spec background. I just really simplified it. When I was in a wetsuit, like most men have pretty heavy legs, specifically in wetsuits. So if I was in a wetsuit, I needed about 6 pounds up on my shoulders. So soldering iron comes out, holes get drilled, and you mount those 6 pounds through the shoulders. When I was in a wetsuit, in a dry suit, I needed the weight down 12 pounds. So I had the holes down. And I'm a lazy human being. Lazy. So the whole idea of like cutting the weights off and strapping it there became really mind-numbing. So the idea of having a weight system became really important because I'm just a dry suit diver. So I think that was, if you compare it, for example, with the Razor, a different point of view. Many people don't know that, but Steve was actually one of my mentors becoming a cave diving instructor. I assisted him and I dove with him, and I hold him until today. I mean, there's so many things that I still say that are 100% copies of what he says when he's teaching cave diving, and is a true idol. But the thing of, I just couldn't do the wetsuits, and I could not do the oral inflation because simply back then, I have to admit it, my skill level was not good enough.
Right.
The idea of coming down a steep slope with the reel, exchanging regulators, orally inflating, I knew I'm gonna, like, that's not gonna work for me. So I needed something with an inflator. So the first thing for sure was the weight system that we already had with the Aquas, and then for sure we moved it over to the Stealth. So it was very important for me to have the weight system to make it easy, to move the weight easy back and forth. And ideally, because I saw the two aspects, being an explorer and being a teacher. From a teaching point of view, I really hated to get my students in and out of the water a lot, right? Because from the very beginning, you try to make side mounting or any type of diving that you teach to your student, you want to make it seem easy and enjoyable. So on the first 2 days of diving, you don't want to get them out of the water 20 times just to trim them out. And then when people dive in back mounts, they have the wing wrap around the doubles, which gives them an extreme lateral stability.
Yes.
Suddenly, in side mount, they don't have this anymore. They need way more core tension, way more body tension, which some people pick up really fast. Some people don't pick up fast at all. So their head to toe trim and lateral trim is very, very fragile. So sometimes you need to move that weight quite a bit because the first 2 days, the legs are thinking, you move the weight up, then they kind of get the position. So now the legs are floating, you need to move the weight back. So having something that makes it easy for me to do that in the water was very important. And then the next thing was, as much as I love the Hogarthian gear configuration, I'm a huge fan of the WKPP. I'm a huge fan of the cave diving history. And the whole single webbing, huge fan. But from a rental equipment or adjusting it for a student point of view, I just felt it takes a lot. And again, it's my laziness. If I would be less lazy, it would be a more feasible option for me. But I'm very lazy. So I wanted to have those parts separated. And once we separated them, we realized we could make like a medium strength webbing on the shoulders that would not wear and tear so much on the dry suit neck field. Mm-hmm. We could have a really soft crotch strap. So, like dry suits break a lot in the crotch because of the really sharp webbing. But on the hip, where the tank's attached to, we could go really, really stiff. Mm-hmm. So that was literally by accident. I swear to God, one day I had this conversation with Piotr and I'm like, hey, if we already do it separate, we might as well just use different types of webbing.
Yes.
That was the first idea. And then having the buoyancy compensator, back then with the Razor 1, Steve was using a Camelback or / MSR bag. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was an amazing idea. Amazing, because from a small cave point of view, that's where we came from, diving really small cave. You know that your shoulder blades to your chest, that you can't change that. It's bone to bone. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So you need to keep that as small as possible. You don't want to have nothing on your shoulder blades. So that solves that problem. Then it moves the bladder to the center of gravity because we don't have the heavy manifold with the first stage. It's not on top of our head anymore, but in our armpit. So that solves that. So it's like you're solving 3 problems with one simple solution. So I thought that was an absolute amazing idea. Just I didn't have the skill for the oral inflation. So I wanted to have a power inflator. So that's where that came from. And then the first prototype was square, but then we realized that guys have pretty heavy legs, and I was just not an Avanti Quattro thin guy because I'm sorry to tell everybody, in my opinion, they're too soft. I'm not going nowhere, and I'm busy. I want to go somewhere.
Yes.
So, and they were the only fins that were light enough to not make my legs sink during the gliding phase of a frog kick. So we had to extend the buoyancy compensator a little bit lower on top of the butt. And then in one time in the restriction, I'm stuck. My wing is still full, and I realized that I can't roll sideways to deflate. And that was basically the birth of, hey, let's move the dump valve to the lowest point.
Yes.
And then we realized that had a lot of advantages. First of all, I can reach it with both hands. So while scootering, depending on what hand is free, I can dump gas. That's pretty good. And at the end of the day, a dump valve is like a 2.3 centimeter hole in your buoyancy compensator. And I don't know how many people remember that. Like about 9 years ago, the manufacturing plant that makes the dump valves, they use cheap steel. And most people may or may not know that, but power inflators and dump valves, like no manufacturer, not Halcyon, not Oxycheck, like nobody produces that. They just buy that in Cambodia or Taiwan or whatever.
Sure.
So we had massive recalls for Dive Ride, for Halcyon, for everybody, because the springs corroded, broke, and then the dump valve didn't close no more. So for us, it was really important to not have a dump valve in like the upper third of a diver's configuration, because if the dump valve would fail, the only way for you to trap gas in your buoyancy compensator would be basically doing
down, right? Mm-hmm.
And in the Stealth, if you remove the dump valve, you can still dive it just with you're not going to be flat no more. You're going to be like in a 20-degree trim, which is definitely still sufficient to exit a cave safely.
Sure.
So a lot of things actually were sort of like, by designing and by using and by doing, we came up with the solutions to it.
Yeah, it's super interesting. As I said, I've dived it for a while now, and I'm finding some of the conversations with other divers on the podcast really interesting. One of Brian Kaycock's very good advice was, when you're looking to get a side mount system, think about the type of diving that you're going to do, i.e. some of them excel with wetsuit and warm water, and others are better for heavy steels and so on. But I find the modular nature of the XDEEP Stealth now means that it can cross virtually all of the boundaries. So, we can go from a minimalist cave explorer type setup all the way through to a multi-stage or multi-deco cylinder advanced Trimix dive, and still use the same harness. And pretty much, I use the tech for everything now.
I can be very honest about that. I dove the Stealth in cave diving.
Yes.
In 14 countries on the planet. And I had to make almost no adjustments.
Yes.
But there are limitations. If you look at Floridian-based Sidemount equipment, you talk about the Armadillo, you talk about the Nomad, you talk about those guys. They are heavily designed around Worthington steel cylinders, which is the most dominant type of steel cylinder in the Florida area. And they just happen to be vastly heavier in the water than like Fabers or Blue Steel.
Yes.
So like for me, for example, I still use 6 kilos of lead in Europe, but when I go to Mariana, I dive completely with no weight.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, of course, the myth that you can't use the Stealth or you can't use the Razor for cave diving in Florida. So we kind of had to go there, dive. I think the biggest tank we dove was a 104, which I wouldn't recommend. They're really heavy and it's pretty uncomfortable.
I tried it, yeah.
But we dove 85s quite extensively. And I didn't use the sliding D-rings no more. I clipped them into the stage D-rings in the back.
Yep.
But I was in a dry suit though. So I need to make something very clear. If you are planning to dive a 5mm wetsuit with a Worthington 85 or 95, the Stealth is not going to be the unit for you to dive. However, I would sincerely suggest to not dive a 5mm wetsuit with extremely heavy steel cylinders, because your buoyancy compensator literally becomes life support.
Yes.
Which it shouldn't, because you asked me for the deep diving, because I get asked that so much on trade shows when people go like, so what's the maximum depth of the Stealth? And I find this question so confusing, because every time I'm deep diving with the Stealth, most of my tanks have helium in them and float. So like usually the only negative tank that I carry with me is like Nitrox 50. Everything else has helium in it and the O2 is not full.
Yep.
So usually my wing is pretty much virtually empty. So I really don't even understand it.
I think the concept of a balanced rig still comes into play, doesn't it? I mean, you've got to think about, if you start with your exposure protection and you say, hey, I'm diving a dry suit or a wetsuit. So for me, here's the way I work it. If I'm diving saltwater and in a dry suit, I'm using 12-litre steel Faber cylinders. They work perfectly. They're incredibly balanced. Yes, they're negative throughout the whole dive, but they're not very negative at the end. And they're a little bit at the beginning. If I'm going to the tropics and I'm going into a 3mm, 5mm wetsuit with aluminium cylinders, again, you can be balanced with the Stealth. And I was in truck and I had 4 aluminium cylinders and no trouble whatsoever using the recreational harness. It's a matter of thinking it through and making sure you balance your whole rig. And as you say, using super heavy steels, it's a challenge. I've dived Ginny Springs and there I was in I was in a wetsuit and I think I was using the Classic. It was a while ago now, but you have to hire your cylinders. But that went okay. And yes, I did have them back on the stage D-rings as opposed to the sliding D-rings.
Yeah, they're heavy and they stay heavy.
Yeah.
But what I find a lot in Europe, it depends the plastic foot.
Yes.
Some of the Fabers, when they have the plastic foot on them, they behave super similar to aluminum tanks. I had 15-liter Fabers that with a plastic foot at 60 bars literally float in the lake. Okay. That happened as well. The only tank that I really say that I used once and I would never ever do ever again was a 300 bar 12-liter tank in Mallorca cave diving. And they were really horrible, but everything else is pretty feasible. But I would just clearly say, hey, if you live in Florida and you're going to dive mostly like 104s or 95s and you dive in a wetsuit, literally, even as a designer, I'm sorry, I would maybe not recommend you to use the. If you're in a dry suit, for sure, yes. And I mean, we have a video online that people can look at, and you can see my wing is empty, and I'm moving at the same pace as everybody else. And we have quite a strong group now in Florida that moved over to the Stealth, which is quite interesting and makes me very happy. But the balanced rig, what I usually always recommend people, specifically in aluminum tanks, because there's also like a trend in Sidemount diving that people don't use weight or very little weight. I would always recommend people to consider what happens if they do have a gas failure in one cylinder and come out only with one. And at the end of the dive, this one cylinder that they still have on them is going to be fairly buoyant and fairly low on gas. So I usually tell people you really should be able to sink with no tanks on.
Yes.
And so the weight difference that you will experience basically is mostly the consumed gas or the weight of the gas that you have at the beginning of the dive that you don't have at the end, which is a couple of kilos per cylinder. Is really not that much.
Yep. Very good. Looking at the stealth in a bit more detail, we talked about the modular fashion. We talked about how easy it is to set up, but there's some other things too. The weight management system. I mean, there's 4 different weight pockets that you can put on. I've typically been using the middle one, but I can imagine, dry suit for some divers, maybe they need the bigger ones. But you talked earlier about moving through restrictions and the hard back that sits between your shoulder blades with very, very strong. I think it's Cordura is the material. Tell us a bit about some of the other features on the stealth that make it what it is.
I love that question. So I don't know if you remember the first Matrix movie.
Yes.
Now, when they have to rescue Morpheus, they go into this white room, right?
Yeah.
And then Neo says, we need weapons. And then like this huge shelves rock up with like all the guns in the world.
Yes.
So I'm a traveling cave diving explorer, right? So I'm leaving to Australia tomorrow, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 weeks ago, I came back from Madagascar. And earlier in the year, I was in a place that I can't talk about. And last year, I was in Tanzania. And so every time when I pack my bag, it's like, what's going to be the task at hand? And what do I need? So I was always dreaming about that. I'm going to take this wing with this weight pocket and this and this. That was always like a bit of a dream of mine. And Piotr really had to completely and utterly make that dream come true and make it a reality. So yes, we have different weight pockets depending on, what people use. And I think also the webpage is made in a really good way where people can sort of like put it together and see what it all looks like. If you look at the 3 wing types, now we started off with the classic because it was this adaptation of the MSR bag, right? And the idea back then was to have it removable for really small restrictions. Having said that, there's only me and one other guy that I know that actually ever have done that. And in retrospect, I'm not 100% sure it was necessary, but it was cool to try it anyway. And I'm still using the classic. I'm a classic guy. What can I tell you?
Mm-hmm.
I really also love it for traveling because I can wrap like my second stages in it in the back and then just inflate it a little bit. So that's pretty good for protection.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did was, I think, and that was Piotr's idea, was the tech and the rec was actually direct feedback from our Stealth 2.0 Facebook group. Because we asked people, we did a poll, hey, what do you use? Because it was the same situation when Piotr asked me, hey, how many Stealths should I send you? And I'm like, I don't know, 20. I'm going to have enough for 5 years.
Yeah.
And then suddenly we sold so many. It was insane. And then we did poll and we asked people, so what do you use the Stealth for? And it was like, I can't remember the numbers. So don't, please, I might be lying, but it was, but just to give you an idea, it was like 85% used the Stealth for recreational diving.
Yes.
And I was like, what? So we literally made the perfect design of a Sidemount system for a cave diving explorer, specifically one that travels and changes a lot between wet and dry suits, or somebody that teaches other people how to use the rig.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's really one of the things that makes the Stealth so unique. If you ever, and to all the listeners, if you ever meet me anywhere in the world, you can literally walk up to me, no matter what your size is, and go like, Patrick, can I try your Stealth?
Yes.
And I'm going to adjust it for you. And you can jump in the water, try it out, and come back out. And then I'm going to put it back on my size. It's that simple.
Yes.
So we decided it's perfect gear for the cave diving community. So we thought, maybe considering that 85% of our clients are actually not cave diving,
yes,
we could put a little bit of effort and try to make something for them. So we put out the question, like, if there was anything that you might change on the Stealth, what would it be? And the top answers was just, we would like something that is permanently attached.
Yep.
Because for whatever reason, I guess if you're not into cave diving, the whole mounting stuff to you with bungees doesn't give like the greatest deal of confidence.
Yes.
A little bit like you're looking out of your airplane window and you realize that the entire wing is just put together with duct tape. So I guess the pilot thing is totally fine, but maybe the passenger doesn't. So yes, that was one of the things. And I got like quite interesting answers or questions on trade shows when people were like, Patrick, the whole bungee system, that just doesn't work. It doesn't work on long dives, like it hurts. And I'm like, I don't know how long your dives are. I've only done like about 5-6 hours, but maybe go longer than that. And that really
yes, that's to dig in a bit. Yeah, I remember actually in Malta we had the classic bladders, but we did fix them permanently. So that's quite interesting. We made our own mods to do that. Yeah.
What a lot of people were into,
Yeah.
and again, it comes where your preferences. Take for
Hmm.
example the sliding D-ring.
Yes.
Now, first of all, I want to clarify a myth. The sliding D-ring, as far as I know, where I have it from, was invented by Steve Bogart.
Hmm.
He used to use metal D-ring in the back, metal D-ring in the front, and then he had a piece of inner tube in the middle when the tank was neutral.
Right.
Just the inner tube, usually with, sunlight, UV radiation, you get that kind of porous and kind of break. So I think that's why he walked away from the idea. But I really love the idea because, first of all, if you use continuous bungee, the tank is more attached to your hip and kind of like folds down into the bungee.
Yes.
So you don't depend so much on a lot of different variations where to clip the tank. Whether when you use the loop bungee and most of the weight of the tank is like pulled up into your armpits, the tails of the tank become very flexible, very movable.
Yes.
And then I've always been a very avid deep diver. So what was important for me when I jump in the water, I dive in 1845 or 1260 or whatever, the tanks kind of like need to sit where I need them to sit, but I don't know that really before I jump in the water, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And then we had luxury tanks and Catalinas. It's not that huge difference, but there is a difference. And then I was a traveling instructor. And so when people pay my flight to come to Poland or Italy or France to teach them, I kind of like need to rock up with my A game, if that makes sense. Like when I jump in the water, they put down the coin. I can't look like a novice.
There must be an element of pressure, right?
Yeah, just a little bit. And it doesn't go away, I swear to God. But so the sliding D-ring really made it possible for me to be in the place and then move the tanks to where it looks good.
Yep.
Having said that, I always carry the tanks much higher than everybody else. Everybody has this obsession with the tanks being perfectly parallel to their size, which I'm a big advocate of using a proper frog kick that has you open the size, but that's a whole different story. Okay. But so I'm a really big fan of the rubber D-rings also because I'm coming from small cave diving.
Yes.
So the thought of having it separate, like cuttable,
yes.
I really like that it twists and turns. If I put some muscle to it, I really like.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have spent enough time in my life being stuck in a cave with rigid things. So I really try to avoid as much as possible having any metal or rigid pieces on my diving equipment. And so the number one thing that I get told is, Patrick, the rubber sliding D-rings, they don't work. And now I have no problem, and people can modify their stealth in whatever way they want. I think that side mounting in its origin was a very unique, personalized equipment configuration for cave exploration. Nowadays, it has changed a little bit. It has more into team diving and maybe more like a streamlined, a standardized gear configuration. But other than that, please, everybody can do with themselves whatever they want.
Yes.
But the one thing that I don't, please don't tell me it doesn't work. You can tell me you don't like it or you prefer something else, but I swear to God, I'm the living proof it just works. Because I'm not, like, for example, you talked about steel tanks. I always dive steel tanks when I'm in Europe. Yes. I honestly think I have to choose my words very carefully now. I don't find it the smartest solution to wear 450 grams of undergarment and then use aluminum tanks and load your stealth with like 20 kilos of weight.
I'm with you 100%. Back to the balance system, right? Yeah.
But it's what people know from TV, right? They know from TV that everybody wears a helmet, everybody wears Avanti Quattros, and everybody has aluminum tanks. So they think they want to fit in, so that's what they got to wear.
Yeah.
But in my personal opinion, I hardly ever use a helmet unless I'm alone. My personal opinion about helmets is that it really deteriorates team diving because people with the light on the helmets have the tendency to not look at each other anymore that much. So I'm personally not a very big fan. I think there's a very valid use for a helmet if you dive on your own. Mm-hmm. When in surveying, we need the light there because we have to survey, or we used to use the survey slate before the Nemo came around. Diving a really small cave, if I have to pull somewhere through, I need to see where I'm going because the next time I exhale, visibility is going to be gone. So I have to split moment to take an image of where I'm going. And scootering. You start scootering in Sidemount, your head is the highest point. We had some really nasty accidents, 17 staples once, not in me, another guy. But for team diving, personally, not very big fan. Even now with those fancy mounts from different manufacturers, they turn the light backwards. So great, you don't blind your own team, but everybody else is not blind.
So I can see where you are.
But it's a person, you know what I mean? It's a very, very personal preference. And I never liked the Avanti Quattros because for my personal use, they were too soft. And I definitely do not like aluminum tanks when I'm like packed like a Michelin man for the Siberian winter. So I definitely prefer steel cylinders for that. Absolutely no questions asked. And yes, and I think that the Stealth, you know, it was not designed specifically to do that. We're just lucky enough to a certain degree that in all the diving that I've done so far, I was in France and it didn't have lead because they're all diving steel doubles. They were like, what we need the lead for? So I went to a sport shop and they had these wristbands and ankle bands for jogging. So I just bought 12 kilos of weight there because they only had singles in aluminum. And I could mount that into my Stealth. So literally so far, I still have to find the dive that I couldn't do. And just one last bit of a story. So in the place that I can't talk about, we managed to find, visibility was pretty bad. There's this huge collapse. And I thought the cave was over. I was really depressed, like after a week of hiking there. And then between those huge boulders, and I'm with a rebreather, it's all pretty deep. And between those huge boulders, I find these no mount restrictions. I'm like, I'm going to do that with a Stealth. And Piotr had just sent us Stealths, but I literally have only dived rebreather. So I took a Stealth out of the box that morning, adjusted it for myself, and did an 85-meter no-mount cave exploration dive, and then came back. So, and I posted on Facebook, and of course for me it's always weird to say, oh, the Stealth is cool, because obviously everybody's like, yeah, Patrick, the Stealth is cool, you know. This is just one of those moments, even if I would have nothing to do with it, I thought, dude, I took it out of the box, did an 85-meter exploration dive with it, and then just came back like it was nothing. That was just like, wow, that's pretty badass. I mean, I was super stoked.
Know exactly what you're saying. And I know we all watched the Thai cave rescue with our hearts in our hands, but it must have been really satisfying to see, I don't know which divers it was now, but some of the divers there using Stealth 2.0 system.
There was Mikko Pasi, Ben Remanence. There's the two main that come to my head, not as many others.
Yeah. So, I mean,
what most people don't know, they literally walked into a dive shop there and just took the rental units as well.
Right.
So it's not like, oh, we sent them this highly specialized, you know, like modified. It's just the rental gear that just, and yes, it was really, really, some of the things, I mean, I have to admit, when I see Brian Kaycock in the Stealth.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It is. And Kenny Broad, you have to admit, you have to imagine, so I'm in Bahamas, and then Brian goes like, so tomorrow this friend of mine is going to rock up. Do you mind if he joins us on the dive? His name is Kenny. I'm like, nah, dude, of course, you know, the more the merrier. And then Sky rocks up and I'm like, are you Kenny Broad? And he was like, yeah, you got to be kidding. You're like my hero, bro. Literally, you guys are so badass. And now both of them dive the Stealth. It's like a dream come true. And whenever I do like an exploration, literally the two of them and often Martin and Farr also are like the main guys to post on my Facebook and go like, what you guys do is so cool. And I'm like, well, you don't even understand what that means. If you guys say that to me, it's ridiculous, man.
It's pretty special. And I don't know if you heard, excuse me, I don't know if you heard the last episode, but Brian had very positive things to say about the Stealth. And I think what he liked about it the most was what you were mentioning, the ability to adjust it and have it set up very quickly for both the students and clients for guiding and courses. So I think it's a massive advantage that the Stealth brings to those of us that are guides and instructors.
And that have rental equipment. You know, if you have somebody that buys the thing from day one and you can spend an entire day to put it in on them, then it's one thing. But if you have rental equipment and it has to like kind of like rotate a little bit, at the end of the day, hey, I became a diving instructor to go diving, not to sit in an air-conditioned
for
room
sure.
playing around with fucking webbing, you know?
The only piece of advice I think we need to give is not make the mistake I made twice of cutting the webbing too short. So, and I've done it twice. So you think I would have learned the first time. I cut it for my wetsuit; it was all perfect fitting, and then I went into a dry suit and had to buy a new one. But never mind. Luckily, I've got a few now.
Usually, that's why we keep this little bit of extra in the back,
and the rubber bands as well, right?
Yeah, but it does happen for sure.
Well, that concludes our XDEEP Stealth 2.0 deep dive. I hope that hearing about the development and diving the Stealth 2.0 has been as interesting for you as it was for me. I want to thank XDEEP for supporting Speaking Sidemount, and also Patrick Widmann for the wealth of information that he shared with us today. We touched a little today on Patrick's exploration with the DRSS, and in our next episode, we're going to hear much more about this, and specifically about the project in the caves of Madagascar. All that and much more in our next episode of Speaking Sidemount. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.